Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to our third session of this series tonight. A taste of Pirkei Avot, learning with rabbis who are alumni of the Marshall T. Meyer Fellowship, and seeing some familiar faces, some from long ago, some from not so long ago. And tonight it's such a privilege to welcome back Rabbi Margo Hughes Robinson, who is a fellow here at BJ from 2018 to 2020. Margo is a New York organizer at Trua and was ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary in 2021, where she also earned an MA in Midrash and served for 2 years as the program coordinator of the Milstein Center for Interreligious Dialogue. And we're going to be exploring tonight the third chapter of Pirkei Avot, having gone through the first and second the last 2 weeks. And Margo, it's such a privilege to have you with us tonight, and to be able to learn from you.
Thanks so much, Dave. Thanks for the invitation to be here. Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited to be back and be learning with this beautiful, beloved community, and to dig into a very funky chapter, I would say, of Pirkei Avot, where our sages are going on a journey, and so are we. Just some rules of the road for the next hour and 15 minutes or so. I would encourage, I know some people don't like the Zoom chat. I would encourage you, if you like to use the Zoom chat, please, the Zoom chat is your friend. I will be checking it. It is a great way to get my attention, especially when we're screen sharing, because it'll do a little ding even when we're all sort of, in a box on one side or another during a screen share. I will also say one of the things I really love about teaching on Zoom or in virtual settings is the way in which the chat kind of becomes its own commentary. It's like our own contemporary running Rashi on whatever's going on in the class. So feel free to populate the chat. And to get us started, if you're at all willing to read aloud at some point during this hour plus we have together, I would love if you don't mind dropping your name right now in the chat. That way, when I or we all get a little tired of hearing my voice, we have a list already of people who would like to be volunteered or voluntold or offer up their voices for reading, so that we don't have to have the pregnant pause while we wait for someone to volunteer. So if you're in a reading mood, feel free to drop your name in the chat right now. I'll put mine in. I'm definitely going to do some reading. Thanks so much, Adria. I'm also going to drop, and I'll do this some more as people come in, the link to our source sheet. Thanks so much, Sonia. Okay, awesome. And if you just put your name in the chat at some point, I will assume that you aren't just shouting your name as a comment to whatever we're studying at the given moment, but rather are later in the game offering to read, and we will also receive you with gratitude. So some grounding, right? We're about halfway through Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers or the wisdom of our sages, right? There's a million sort of beautiful potential translations of this phrase, but I'm going to open up our source sheet and we're going to spend quite a bit of time in this sheet, and then I hopefully will engender some discussion, and if it gets really juicy at some point, we'll stop screen share and see each other, but we're gonna dive in. So Chazal, our sages of blessed memory, have some explicit questions that they're addressing in this chapter, and then also some implicit questions. So I'd like to start with the explicit questions, and then hopefully kind of as we move through these sources, and there's a lot of them, so there's no prize if we get to all of them, and there's no big sadness if we don't get to all of them. But hopefully we'll uncover some of the implicit questions that are in this exploration of our sages, because they really use the whole arc of this chapter, of chapter 3, to sort of go on a journey, but I think also to square some really difficult questions about free will and choice, and also to some extent theodicy. I would just like keep that as a preview in the back of your head. The rabbis are often, especially the Tanaim, right? The like second, third, and fourth century sages who compiled and are featured in the Mishnah are like very concerned with this idea of the idea of free will, the concept of fairness, and also the question of why bad things happen to good people. So we'll dig into it. So they're explicit questions that we'll kind of all start out together is, where do we come from? Where are we going? And what is going to help us get there? I would say that is the theme of chapter 3, at least in the pshat, in the plain text. I will say I can't take credit for that idea. That is Rabbi Jesse Olitsky's idea, I believe, from his Pirkei Avot commentary, right? That the theme of this chapter is, where do we come from? Where are we going? And how do we get there? Let's dive in a little bit. Adria, would you be willing to read this first Mishnah for us? I'll go ahead and mute myself.
You're giving me names to read? Thanks.
You can do it. And even if you can't, we won't know.
Akabia ben Mahalalel said, mark well 3 things, and you will not come into the power of sin. Know from where you come and where you are going, and before whom you are destined to give an account and reckoning. From where do you come? From a putrid drop? Where are you going? To a place of dust, of worm, and of maggot. Before whom you are destined to give an account and reckoning? Before the King of Kings of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He.
Thanks so much. Wow, what a way to open a chapter. Every time I come to the 3rd chapter of Pirkei Avot, I think a little bit about like, it feels in some ways what it must have been like to like go see the Rites of Spring for the first time, right? That like symphony and ballet, like, you know, I have an expectation of what it will be like to encounter Mishnaic philosophy or rabbinic writing, and then all of a sudden it's like, bum bum. I'm like, wow, it got very intense, it got very earthy, it got very sensual in a way I wasn't ready for, and yet we're here and I signed up for it, is how I often feel beginning this chapter. So let's like go through and start picking this apart a little bit. Another note, I know most of the folks in this room already, but I want to be really, really clear. And I'm sorry that I'm like interpolating my own teaching right now, but I can sometimes get a little bit silly or humorous or even sarcastic with Torah. And I just want to pre-state that I am doing that not out of a desire to in any way denigrate our tradition, but rather it was actually part of the way I was trained as a midrashist, that I really view this kind of unpacking with Torah as a kind of very serious play. And when you love something or someone dearly, right, you can be intimate with them, and it also means you can be a little bit silly or playful. So please like know that if I'm taking a tone with the text, it's out of deep, deep love and connection to these texts and a desire to do like serious, playful, deep meaning making with them and with all of you. So then turning back to Akabia bin Mahalalel, as Adria got for us beautifully on the first try, better than I did. Says, look out for these 3 things. Like watch these 3 things and you will not come into the power of sin. Basically, these are the guardrails right on the bowling alley of an ethical life, according to Akabia. Know from where you come, where you're going, and before whom you're going to be giving an account or reckoning. So it says, we come from a putrid drop, and we are going to a place of dust, of worm, and of maggot. And I will say, I looked into a lot of commentaries because I find that phrase a little distressing initially. And wow, so do so many other rabbinic readers of this text. One commentary I looked at, like, had paragraphs and paragraphs of like medieval science trying to be like, well, actually, we don't come from a putrid drop. And this is how I, in the 1200s, understand the entire process of pregnancy. And I'm really uncomfortable, and I'm going to write a lot of pages about it. And other people, other commentators went on and about this idea of, well, we know the body is going to go, from Adam, the first being, to Adamah, the ground, and so ashes that are like it. But really, I think one of the things many commentators draw on this line is that it's supposed to be guardrails, not of despair, but of humility, of like this idea that I started very small and a little bit gross, and I may end my time on this planet small and a little bit gross and hanging out with some bugs that are also small and a little gross. And yet there's something eternal about my actions, and there's something eternal about the soul, the neshama within my body. And that is the piece that will be able to encounter the eternal. So it's almost like that Rev Simcha quote, right? That you should have two pieces of paper in your pocket, right? Like, I am but dust and ashes, and the world was created for my sake, to keep it in either pocket. Similarly, like, I started a little small and gross. I'm going to a place where I will be a little small and gross. And yet my actions have deep impact, and I am responsible for them. Like, don't think that your smallness means that you're in some way not accountable, and that you're not going to have a deep seismic encounter with the King of Kings. Sonia, I see your question. Where is the soul implied here? Yeah, it appears more in the commentary. So it's commentators in later centuries who read this text sort of insert the idea of the soul. They say what's missing here, or the piece of you that is going to be called up and destined for an accounting and a reckoning, is not the physical body, but rather either your actions or your neshama itself. So it's not present here in the pshat of the text. Does that help answer your question, Sonia? I'm looking for you on the.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I appreciate that. I must have missed that you were talking about the commentary, because yes, it's not mentioned here, and it's clear. I mean, the humility came to my mind before you mentioned it. I have to say, I'm so proud. I was looking at these attributes.
Nailed it.
Avot. I mean, it's really clear that at the very end, before whom you are destined to give an account and reckoning, before the King of the Kings of the Kings, the Holy One. I love the way Adria read that. I mean, that's astounding. So, I mean, we are nothing. I mean, when I read that, it felt like we were nothing, and so I really was wondering where the soul is here. But if we're having to give an account, then I guess in a sense, there's something about who we are, where we're going, where we come from, what we do with our lives that has to be, that is important. And that's connected to the soul. It's not connected to the body.
Exactly. I think it's the contrast, that the sort of implied importance that I think is stunning about this, right? When it's like, consider yourself as lowly as possible, but you're still going to have this sort of ultimate encounter. I'll say also, I love the way that the last line of this Mishnah in Hebrew is the same as like the last line of every verse of Shalom Aleichem. Lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu. That, right, like Shalom Aleichem was composed at a totally different century than Pirkei Avot, but there's this rhyming across texts and across centuries that we're going to be looking at actually a lot in this time together, that I encourage folks to look into. Ooh, some great questions in the chat. Thank you. Where does a copy of Mahalalel, am I saying right? Yes. Suggest proper behavior? Is assumed that we know this. Ooh, Joni, I'm going to ask you to like hold that for us, because that is where we are going. Is like, how do we know what the behavior or the accounting? How do we know how to show up to the accounting? We're getting there in a couple of Mishnayot. And Nancy, yeah, putrid is like such a gross word. Yeah, it's that gross in the Mishnah, and it disturbs some of the commentators. They're like, we're not gross. There's a famous commentary on this that I was talking about earlier that like really goes into I think it's Midrash Shmuel, if I'm but I could have that wrong. Where it's like, no, we're not mitipa sarucha, which is like a gross, nasty little drop. Or like fetid or putrid. It's like a very gashmias word. It's like yeah, you're like little and stinky. And that's not something I typically look for in my sacred text. I don't like to think of myself as little and stinky. But I think what is so artful here is the contrast. Right? That like if our rabbis and their memorization and recitation, our sages are in some ways building a mind palace to God, this is also a great mnemonic for someone who once had to memorize. If you think about the Tanaim, who like memorized all of the oral Torah, right? And so like in the time of the Tanaim, right, you have your rabbis who are interpreting and making law and making halachic decisions. And the Beit Midrash, you have a guy sitting there who's just called your Tana. And you can point to the Tana and be like, okay, what does, Akabya say about at the beginning of the 3rd chapter of Pirkei Avot? And then like this guy could just tell you, he would just recite it from memory. I wonder if it's actually partially a mnemonic device to like start off with a bang and very intense so that you can ground yourself in the flow, the literary flow of the chapter, but also to start laying out sort of the grandeur in some ways, like the intensity of, like I said, it's like rites of spring. You're coming in and all of a sudden you're immersed in it. You're there and there's something shocking about it that I think as performers or readers or listeners of this text really draws us in. But again, it's like not something we expect from like rabbinic literature as a genre. I wanted to bring in the Talmud Yerushalmi, so in the what's called the Palestinian or the Jerusalem Talmud, as opposed to the Babylonian Talmud. Two Talmuds. In Tractate Sota, which has so much rich material, a lot of great midrashim on the Exodus, actually. Oh, yes, it is like a Gauguin painting, exactly, Marjorie. I'm seeing in the chat, but the Jerusalem Talmud brings a rephrasing of Akabya's question and statement that I think is so beautiful. I did not want us to miss out on it. So they say, there we have stated, Akabya ben Machalalel says, consider 3 things and you will not commit any transgression. They're just translating it differently. Rabbi Abba ben Rav Papai and Rabbi Yoshua from Sichnin, in the name of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, said, all 3 Akabya derived from the same verse. Remember your creator. And in English, it goes, your fountain, your cavern, your creator. Your fountain, from where you came, the place you sprang forward from. Your cave, to where you are going, meaning your grave. Right? It brings to mind like Machpelah in Hebron, where the patriarchs are buried in this literal cave. And then your creator, before whom you will be accountable in the future. I just wanted to highlight for folks in Hebrew, again, right, because all of this text was memorized and then not just recited, but really performed when it was being composed. In Hebrew, there's 3 things to remember: your fountain, your cavern, your creator. It even sounds good in English, is bircha, borecha. Oh, did I say that right? Or bircha, yeah, bircha, borcha, borecha. There's like it rhymes and it's alliterative. It's a pun. The rabbis love puns to help, but it's also a mnemonic device to help remember. Like, and in some ways it's lovely, right? Of like, okay, what are the 3 things I need to keep top of mind to sort of be in the right mindset to pursue Torah, to avoid sin? Bircha, borcha, borecha. Where I came from, where I'm ultimately going, and my creator. It's like this beautiful bet resh triangle of focus that the tradition leaves us with. So any thoughts on this Mishnah before we move into a little farther down into the chapter?
Yeah, I just I'm impressed with that's the same root as Baruch. I mean, I don't know a lot of Hebrew, but the word Baruch, blessing, isn't that the same 3 letters?
You're right. The chaf here is a suffix meaning your, like shelcha or shalach.
But just looking at the consonants without the aleph, like when it's just beit, resh, and what is that? The final chaf?
Yes, so I'm saying the chaf is a suffix,
Okay.
meaning it's not, the chaf there is not part of the, is not
I
part of
see
the
what you're
root.
saying. It just shows
But
up
it's
that
three
way
closely
here.
related. Yeah, it's three closely related roots too, of like, it's
Okay.
bet yud resh and then bet vav resh and then bet resh aleph. But again, you're so right, because remember, these texts were all meant to be performed, not just recited, but like performed with great intention. And so even if it's not there in the text, like there in the roots, the orality, it's intended for a listening audience who would make exactly the same connection that you're making right now, Adria, and that they would hear, like under, right? We're talking about like the subtext, right? They would hear your cavern or your fountain, your cavern, your creator, but they would also hear in the consonants a blessing, a blessing, a blessing, or blessed, blessed, blessed. That there's like there's an extra layer just by virtue of what it sounds like, even if it's not there in the roots, that can totally be read in there, and I think makes it even sweeter in some way. I like this version a lot better than like you're a filthy drop and then you're gonna be worm food and you should be really nervous, that it to instead have this like beautiful chant almost is stunning. Oh, Marjorie, I can't wait to look at this link. I'm going to save that so I can go see the MFA website afterwards. So we're going to move to the next Mishnah, but if you have lingering feelings about this one, please feel free to drop it in the chat. So we're going to move to 3:14. So we're moving way later in the chapter. I'll read this one. He used to say, this is a long one, beloved is man, or beloved are human beings, for they were created in the image of God. Especially beloved is man, or is human beings, for it was made known to him that he'd been created in the image of God. For it is said, in the image of God, God made man. Meaning, it's like particularly special that human beings are not only created B'Tselem Elohim, but that we get to be aware of it. We have the opportunity to encounter godliness in one another and see the godliness in our own humanity. They take it a step further. They say, beloved are Israel, for they were called children to the all-present. And especially beloved are they, for it was made known to them that they're called the children of the all-present, as it is said in Deuteronomy, you are children of the Lord your God. Beloved are Israel, that a precious vessel was given to them. Especially beloved are they, for it was made known to them that the desirable instrument with which the world was created was given to them. As it is said in Proverbs in Mishlei, for I give you good instruction, forsake not my teaching. So in this Mishnah, we've got kind of three layers with the same formula of like, this creation is so special, but they are especially special because we have awareness of how special it is. I'm repeating myself so many times on purpose to sort of, again, reflect some of the orality of this text, right? Beloved are human beings because they're made B'Tselem Elohim, and we get to know that. Beloved are the Jewish people because we are called the children of the Makom, the all-present, and how much more so that we know that it's written down. And then similarly, beloved are the Jewish people because a precious vessel was given to us. And again, how much more special that we know that we have it. It's not like, oh, secretly it's been up in the attic all along and at the perfect moment we'll reveal it. It's like, it's we say, right, it's shot in the Torah, lo b'shamayim the Torah is not in heaven, that you should say like, oh, who's gonna go get it for us? Like it's close to us. That they say, how incredibly precious is it that we are walking around with the blessing of being cognizant that we're made in the image of God, that we are in a loving relationship with a present creator, and that we have Torah as an instrument or a vessel of covenantal relationship. Sonia, what's up?
This really reminds me of something that has stood out for me in our Siddur. There's a line that says, thank you for my capacity to love you or to be aware of you or something like that. So thank you for my capacity. And the other thing, and I'm sorry I'm not better at identifying the place. The other thing that it reminds me of is just shortly in our daily service, we immediately at the beginning of the Amidah, I believe, if I'm correct, and it really struck me when we shut down for COVID, and I was going to Minyan daily and started to get a little familiar with this right during COVID too. It was just so startling to me that we begin with, thank you for blessing us with intelligence, discernment, wisdom, knowledge, those things. I mean, we thank God right away for being aware of our religion, our religious capacity. It's amazing to me always.
Yeah, like there's not only just the blessings, but the capacity to be aware and appreciate our blessings. I wonder if that'll like populate some of our discussion about free choice in a minute too. Marjorie, I saw you had your hand raised for a second. Did you still want to share? If not, feel free to, again, just pop it in the chat. I'm excited to see what you have to say. So I want to hold that in the back of our minds, this idea of like this double blessing that we have as human beings, as Jews, and as people who are, even in this moment, right, studying Torah. And I want to hold that together as we now read, we're jumping around, forward and back in the chapter. Mishnah 6. And Sonia, would you read this one for us? It's also got some names. I apologize.
Yes, I see that. I feel the same way Adrian does about it. Okay. Rabbi Halafta of Kefar Hananiah said, when 10 sit together and occupy themselves with Torah, the Shekhinah, I can't even do that, Shekhinah abides among them, as it is said, God stands in the congregation of God. How do we know that the same is true even of 5? As it is said, this band of his he has established on earth. How do we know that the same is true even of 3? As it is said, in the midst of the judges, he judges. How do we know that the same is true even of 2? As it is said, then they that fear the Lord spoke one with another, and the Lord hearkened and heard. How do we know that the same is true even of 1? As it is said, in every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come unto you and bless you.
Amen. Thank you for reading.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like a beautiful example, I feel like, of rabbinic like midrash making and the use of proof texts, especially with like lists. Right, the rabbis, especially the midrashists, love lists, and they love to bring like a good juicy proof text. And like, thank God we've got proof text, so they don't even have to work that hard. Right, that like for 10, God stands in the congregation of God. The word here is like adat or edah, and they're like, that word, we have like 6 different places where that means 10 people. So we're going to use this word congregation, adat Yisrael or adat Hashem, to mean 10. How do you know this about 5? The word that almost uses for band in other places is used for hand, particularly like the 5-finger smackdown that God sometimes delivers while smiting. And they use this to mean it also could just be 5 people. If you want to read about the 5-finger smackdown of God, I recommend Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, which is an 8th century midrash that talks about what each finger does in like divine vengeance. It's amazing. So they say, okay, we've got a proof text for 5. We have a proof text for 3, right? In the midst of the judges, they're referring to a Beit Din. They say, oh, it's a Beit Din. 3 rabbis, 3 dayanim, 3 judges. God hangs out with 3 people. Same of 2, same of 1. This is a very lovely list where we go from a group of 10 people and we really narrow it down. But Jewish texts love to make lists. I am curious if this brings to mind any other like large group of people that get argued down smaller and smaller. Where might this resonate? Where else, right? We talked about already how part of this chapter kind of rhymes with Shalom Aleichem. Where else might we hear another biblical or textual rhyme? Yes. Oh, Nancy, you're my ringer. Yeah. Sodom and Amorah, Sodom and Gomorrah. It sounds a lot like Bereshit chapter 18, right? Then Abraham came forward and said to God, right? This is where they're arguing about Sodom and Gomorrah. Will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? What if there's 50 people within the city who are innocent? Will you wipe out the whole place and not forgive it for the sake of the innocent 50 who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as well as the guilty, so all of the innocent and guilty fare alike. Far be it from you. He's like, God, this is not what you do. This is not your MO. Shall the judge of all earth not deal justly? He's like, do your job, Hashem. And Hashem answered, if I find 50 within the city of Sodom, 50 innocent ones, I will forgive the whole place for their sake. And Abraham spoke up, saying, here I venture to speak to my Lord, who I am but dust and ashes, right? There's a lot of rhymes in chapter 3 in this story, right? We already talked about the worm and the ash and the dust. What if the 50 innocent should lack 5? Will you destroy the whole city for want of 5? I've argued you down to 50. What about 45? God says, I will not destroy if I find 45 there. But he spoke up again and said, what if 40 should be down there? I will not do it for the sake of the 40. And he said, let not my Lord be angry if I go on. But what if 30 should be found there? I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, I venture once again to speak to my Lord. What if 20 shall be found there? I will not destroy for the sake of 20. He said, let not my God and Lord be angry if I speak but this last time. What if 10 should be found there? I will not destroy for the sake of the 10. Having finished speaking to Abraham, Hashem departed and Abraham returned to his place. I do like that God is finally like, you make a great point, but I do have a limit. 10 is the final offer. I'm leaving. But there's a rhyme here, right? Like, and I don't mean a literal rhyme, although they're using some of the same words and the same sounds in the Hebrew, but there's almost like sort of a patterning, right? That the sages composing and knitting together Pirkei Avot, I think, are very mindful that their listeners have in their head all of these echoes of texts. And they're doing sort of this really beautiful inversion in some ways with that previous Mishnah of this very famous argument with God that, if God will not destroy for 50, for 45, for 30, for, smaller and smaller and smaller, that similarly, like, right, God is clearly present in the midst of the whole congregation. God is present in a minyan, but also when there are 5. And also when there are 3 people, and also when there are 2, and even when you're alone, right? It says, well, we have these beautiful, verses from Exodus that are in the singular. So that must mean the Shekhinah dwells even when we're just by ourselves. Like, you're never really alone, right? So we have now this precious vessel of Torah, and also the Shekhinah. We might have started the chapter thinking we're only going to see God sort of in some final ultimate accounting moment, but only a few Mishnayot later, the text is saying, if you're willing to tune in, not just as the Torah around all the time, and not just as the awareness of relationship, but like, you have access. God is around while we're trying to navigate this like hurly-burly, wormy, sometimes putrid, sometimes beautiful world. While we're still sort of on this idea, before we run to another Mishnayot, I'm curious, like, does this bring up any thoughts or ideas for folks? How is this landing? This sort of inversion of the narrowing down of Sodom and the expansion of the potential of godly presence in our own lives. And it's, the kind of thing I invite you to put it in the chat if you like to, but also I think it's just like a good question to meditate on, or even just to appreciate the structure, right? That like across time and space, it's not only like a sacred hyperlink, but it's also like a really beautiful sort of mind palace that the rabbis are inviting us into with these kind of literary structures. Yes, Sonia.
I'm sorry that I don't know the Hebrew, Margot, but reading the English translation and just the whole way it's presented, it's laid out, it kind of reminds me, this is, I hope not disrespectful, it reminds me of a beautiful children's story, like a kind of soothing way of kind of expanding the idea of this relationship between us and God, and the numbers, how many would how many would you not destroy, and just the sequence of it, and there's just something almost, it feels reassuring in a way. I mean, it's just lovely. It's I don't take to the numbers, and the kind of that kind of sense of it, but the repetition, the repetition of it and the slight change, it's just it's lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's disrespectful at all. I think, again, that's the function of this as a text that is meant to be shared aloud. Right, it's kind of starting to make a comeback for us with like podcasts and audiobooks, but we don't have a sense of orality of the written word in quite the same way in English, I'd say, except for maybe like Shakespeare, or if you had the kind of English teacher that made you, like memorize the first chapter of Chaucer or something, which you're also right, is meant to be enjoyed aloud. The other place is children's books, of that and also liturgy, right? Like having the repetition and the structure, and it doesn't mean that it's simplistic, but it's soothing. And I think it attunes our ears to the subtle changes. It's an invitation in of like, come get close to me. The text is saying like, dear Shuni, like come and figure me out and drash me and like listen for, or it's the leitmotif and the music of like, hear it again and be like, oh, that's familiar and we're friends and now it's changing. And that means something is happening. Beautiful. All right. And now it's going to get a little sticky. Now that we've laid out our like beautiful paintbrushes, whether they're Torah or Gauguin or Mishnah, chapter 3 is going to get sticky. So we have this Mishnah of number 15. Say Hako Safui. Everything is foreseen. It's the same, it's related to the word for scouts, right? Sofim, Safui. Everything is foreseen, presumably by God, and yet freedom of choice is granted to us. And the world is judged with goodness, and everything is in accordance with the preponderance of works, or rather, sort of everything is judged by the majority of deeds. Rov hama'aseh. Like if you're generally doing good, you get put in the good category. If you're generally doing not so well, you get put in the bad category. I just love the tension here. It's like, it's really on you. And there's a little wiggle room, but not so much, right? Like God knows where we're going, says the rabbis. This is not necessarily theology that I subscribe to. And I am grateful for the multiplicity of Jewish theologies that are contained in our tradition. Right, I'll get very like Nick Cave in the Bad Seeds. I don't necessarily believe in an interventionist God in this way. And yet they say even in the, like Mishnaic, rabbinic vision of God, there's still freedom of choice. Right, this is not like Orthodox Presbyterians. There's no elect. You get to figure it out for yourself. You get to choose. And I love this reassurance, like, and the world is judged in goodness. And really we're just going after the majority. We're looking for a solid 80 to 90%. And at the same time, it's still on you. And the Akedat Yitzhak, which is a commentary, says a lot of things, but we're only going to look at a piece of it. comes in with sort of this further explanation of this idea from this Mishnah. Rabbi Hanina says that in spite of the fact that many aspects of a person's life are provisionally predetermined, God did not predetermine a person's moral development. This is entirely up to your own volition. The original determination of man's physical and material attributes is due, I love this, to the leeway given to the angel or the intermediary known as nature. However, since God has reserved for God's self the keys to life, livelihood, and the ability to have children, those three matters are subject to God's override if man's merit suffices. This is in line with the statement of Rabbi Akiva from Pirkei Avot 3:15. While everything is foreseen, freedom of choice has been granted. This actually comes up in a lot of discussions about fertility in the Talmud. The idea that like once nature has intervened, you can't pray for God to come in and fix it. Like I think the classical example in the Talmud is they tell the rabbis like, don't, like if you're praying to conceive, then pray to conceive. And if you have a preference for your baby's gender, to the extent that anybody can influence that, pray for that before conception. They're like, once your baby's conceived, that's locked in and your baby's going to let you know. They're like, once the baby exists, you can't wish for it to be different. Or once your child is born, you can't wish that they were a different person. This is like often where it comes up, right? I'm a parent. I imagine many people on this call are parents. There are oftentimes I don't wish that my son was essentially different, but I wish he might be doing something different. But it's like, it's too late. It's happened. He's already stood up in his high chair. He already smacked a friend, and now we're going to have to deal with it. Thank God, not all the time. He's a very gentle child. But there's this idea of like entropy, right? Like once a cat's out of the bag, do not ask God to go back and fix it. You have free will. Things were set in motion, but like we're moving the chess pieces around. Life is unfolding. But they go back to this statement of Rabbi Hanina, which is like earlier in Pirkei Avot. They say the name Laila, mentioned by Rabbi Hanina as the name, I love this, of the angel in charge of presenting the embryo before God, symbolizes two concepts. Laila meaning night, which is fascinating, I think, for a tradition that has so much fear around young and newborn children, and Lilith, which comes from the same root, Lilith, and Laila, of night. They say night is a time where positive elements like light are absent, and there's the time when one hopes for improvement, rebirth, and renewal. This idea in Psalms of Shomrim Laboker, one who yearns for morning and what is expected to herald. So this commentary is bringing this beautiful idea of sort of the angel Laila as the angel of potential, right? That there's this imagined angel who brings up each little person who doesn't exist yet, but is going to be, and is like, okay, here's not a person, but a potential. Like let's make some preliminary decisions and see what they do with it. But the idea of that being associated with sort of the hoping for dawn, that like moment that is darkest before dawn, that might be when our hope is actually sharpest, maybe the moments where we feel the least in control. There's this like reminder of the actual like stickiness and complicatedness of free will, that there's this reminder of humans' ability to determine their own life from the potential they've been given at the moment where we maybe feel the least amount of agency or the most powerless. We're being Shomrim Laboket, we're the guardians of the morning. So he goes on, Dakedat Yitzhak, to say, human beings cannot tolerate the idea that things are decreed irrevocably, that only negative forces exist. A person feels that he ought to be the master of their own fate. It is quite in line with these expectations of man, then, that God says, all I am asking of you is that you revere me. You guys have in the chat. Ooh, Nancy, say more. Point 2 reminds you of Rosh Chodesh. Are you talking about sort of like the new moon and the darkness of the new moon? Something more? I want to hear more of this.
No, just that Rosh Chodesh is traditionally a time for what you said, what it says here, improvement, rebirth, renewal, that from the darkness, the light will grow.
Exactly. Yeah, that there's something both frightening and alluring about potential. And I love that the Akedat Yitzhak is bringing this idea of Rabbi Hanina and the angel Laila, which I was like was new to me until I put together this source sheet. I never heard of the angel Laila. before, but I'm digging it. So we also have, this is a very long book name, but Shar HaEmunah V'Yasod HaHatzidut, the gates of faith and the what you said, the foundation of piety, an exposition on the idea of divine providence. This is not so popular, but I think very evocative Hasidic work on this idea of free will. And the Shar HaEmunah, that's how we'll refer to it in a short version, Hashem Kinui for this book, says at other times, God conducts the world through revealed governance. I love this, the idea of like participatory budgeting for the universe. And there's a correspondence between the suffering endured and the reward. Sometimes it seems as if a person has the power of choice, and other times it seems as if choice is taken away from him. This is as it said in the Talmud, or in this case, Pirkei Avot, everything is foreseen, yet permission is given for a person to make their own choices. This is the piece that I was hoping we would get to. I think this is where the rabbis start revealing their implicit questions, and it takes us a couple of hundreds of years to be able to say it out loud and to have a rabbinic authority who's willing to come and say, I think, a big question of the ancient sages. Like, you have to wait for the chassids to be able to name this out loud, that at sometimes it seems like God has a plan, and there seems to be a correspondence between, you know, suffering and reward for suffering. And sometimes it seems like I have the power of choice and agency in my life, and sometimes not at all. And that is upsetting to me and to many people. I don't know, does this resonate for folks? I want to, before I give my interpretation, I want to hear, I'm curious how it lands. And I see in the chat there's a question about who is the Akedat Yitzhak. The Akedat Yitzhak is a book that was written by Moses. I just looked up his name. Isaac ben Moses Arama. He was living in the mid 1400s, so right before the expulsion from Spain. But the title of his book is Akedat Yitzhak, and so he's like called by the title of his book. But we could also call him Isaac ben Moses Arama. It's just not as fun. Oh, such rich Torah in this chat. Whenever I encounter a teaching like Rabbi Akiva's, which I cannot personally accept, I remind myself this is one person's view. Yes, Nancy. Shivim panim LaTorah. There's 70 faces of Torah. We don't have to be, you know, mekabel every piece of theology that the rabbis hand to us. Yes. It sounds like it resonates for other people. The later Mishnah reframes the freedom to do good deeds as a credit spread over the living. The metaphor of a creditor feels overbearing and not of loving. Yeah. I think it goes back to the opening of the chapter of like, I thought God was this loving parent we just spent 2 chapters getting to know and feel warm, fuzzy feelings about. And, you know, now it's the accounting of my soul, and I am a putrid drop. It feels like we're back in the putrid drop moment of like, I thought that we were created in the image of God, and that was a warm, fuzzy moment. And now we have to deal with God, the creditor, of like, I don't want God to feel like Ebenezer Scrooge. 100%, Caleb. Yeah. So much going on here. I think that there is a really big anxiety for, I want to say like Chazal or sages of blessed memory, but I think really for all rabbis, for all Jews, for all people, right, is that we so dearly want the world to make sense. And we are so often confronted with a world that is so nonsensical as to be terrifying. I'll plug my own work for a second here. I have been working for the last couple of years on a new translation of Tosefta Sota, so the Tannaitic material that's not in the Mishnah about the rebellious wife. And the rabbis spend most of Tosefta Sota talking not about the Sota, not about the adulterous wife, but about this idea of midah keneged midah. It is so comforting for them. They are so desperate for it to be a framework that can be applied over and over again to the world. Midah keneged midah means literally like measure for measure. That the punishment should fit the crime, that the reward should fit the good deed, that life should be, what they want is life to be predictable. Like really, I think what the Tanaim in this era, which makes sense, right? Their parents and grandparents have seen the temple destroyed. They've had to completely remake their religion, like out in the garden and what is it called? Kerem Yavna, the vineyard of Yavna, right? They all went to like this little suburb and tried to remake a movable religion. They're facing diaspora, they're facing, the Roman government. The temple has been razed. To say like, all I really want from God is life to feel predictable. And to wake up in the morning and have a set of expectations and to know, where I came from, where I'm going, and a map to get there. And like, I really need Torah to be that map, right? We can see sort of the psychological needs and the sociological needs, the communal needs of the rabbinic community here, like really crying out. Yeah, people need to rationalize and compartmentalize. And the rabbis are like, we really want midah keneged midah to be true. And anytime we find a little measure for measure moment in Tanakh, we are going to lift it up. And the people of Sodom have to be really bad because they all got, set on fire. And, Lot's wife also has to be really awful because she was turned to a pillow of salt. And Esau has to be awful because he got cheated out of his blessing. Like this need for it to be concrete and recognizable and easily patterned. And at the same time, the rabbis are aware, like they really want things to be fair, but they're so conscious of their own free will. And they're like conscious of the tohu vavohu, the like chaos and entropy of the world as it is. And so I think this Mishnah is them really starting to wrestle with that. That when they sit there and they go and they repeat to themselves and they perform this message that everything is foreseen, yet freedom of choice is granted. And the world is judged with goodness, and everything is according to the majority of one's deeds or works. That like, this is a belief statement, I think, not just of theology, of what they are reflecting, what they see in the world, but also what they desperately want to be true. I think this Mishnah is a prayer, right? That like someone is watching out. There's some kind of big net, but it's a net that's going to catch me, and I can still make my own decisions. Oh yeah, these rabbis read Job. And they have all kinds of questions and interpretations about Job. Exactly. It's exactly that, Adria. They've read Job and they're living Job's life. I mean, because every person is having a Job experience. Like that's part of being human is having your Job era or multiple Job eras and going like, is God just messing with me? Is that why that, like, I don't have another explanation. And so I really think this Mishnah is a prayer to say, and the world is judged with goodness. Like I have to believe it's going to work out, says Rabbi Akiva. And everything is in accordance with the preponderance of works. And I think there's something even, sort of the redactor of Pirkei Avot knew what they were doing when this quote, whether or not Rabbi Akiva actually said it, having this Mishnah attributed to Rabbi Akiva, I think is particularly poignant. I see some nodding, right? We're in the middle of the Omer, Lag BaOmer, right? And we have the curse of, that his students all got horribly sick with the plague, and that Rabbi Akiva was, according to tradition, and we can read in the Ela Ezra, right? He was martyred, like in a very horrific way. And again, I think that it's a profound expression of hope and of a trying to hold both, right? Of the tohu vavohu and entropy and chaos, and and yet I live my life in a covenantal halachic system and in a relationship with God and a relationship with community with a lot of intention and with this beautiful Torah. And I think this is like a prayerful expression of trying to hold both. This is one construction of trying to hold these two magnets, opposing magnets, together. Everything is foreseen, yet we still have freedom of choice, and the world is judged with goodness. And generally, it's the majority of your actions. It's this, they're trying to hold this like very dynamic yarn ball of complicated and conflicting beliefs and life experiences. And I think how much more so by putting it then into the mouth of Rabbi Akiva. You know, it's like, this doesn't seem to be fair, but I really hope that it's going to end up that way. I think it is in a way, one way we can read this Mishnah. So scroll back through our source sheet. And this is sort of towards the edge, right? It's like the farther we get into chapter 13 or chapter 3 rather, it's like the rabbis can get more and more complex. It's like they're almost trying on all these different ideas in some way, right? This is almost like a full expression of the Shivim Panim to answer these 3 questions of where do we come from as human beings? You know, are we a nasty little drop, or are we B'Tselem Elohim? Are we both? Is God a creditor? Is God a loving parent? Or is God both? Yeah, exactly. Trying to bolster a concept of the world that is a coping strategy. I mean, I think all of us do. That's what it means to have a theology or a master narrative. And I don't think that just because we can notice that we're doing it as a coping mechanism makes it any less sacred. Like, I think it's engaging in the human project of meaning making is one way that we encounter the sacred. You know, sometimes I can go out and like be, you know, bowled over by the grandeur and the awe of it all. And sometimes I can get down in the muck and go like, I don't really get how this works, but I'm going to attempt to describe it. And I think both of those are an encountering of the holy. And so similarly, right, maybe we find some of these, like each Mishnah is almost like a different twisting of the kaleidoscope of the rabbis trying to make sense of these existential questions of like, what's our relationship to Torah, to God, to our own bodies, to the way the world seems to be unfolding in front of us. And so they come to this kind of unsettling moment towards the bottom of the chapter, the end of the chapter. Would someone like to read for us? Maybe either someone whose voice we haven't had the chance to hear tonight, or someone who's already read? I'm not seeing any volunteers, so I will just take it for the sake of our time. But know that like we have 1 or 2 more texts after this, so this is your moment if you've been waiting for a moment to share your voice. So he used to say, everything is given against a pledge, and a net is spread over all the living. The store is open, and the storekeeper allows credit, but the ledger is open, and the hand writes, and whoever wishes to borrow may come and borrow, but the collectors go around regularly every day and exact dues from man, either with his consent and knowledge or without his consent and knowledge. And they have that on which they can rely in their claims, seeing that the judgment is a righteous judgment and everything is prepared for the banquet. And I think there's like a wrestling here of like, you know, we see these kind of in contemporary cliches, like, you know, there's always more time, or, you know, every day is a new day and you can remake yourself. And at the same time, you know, live every day like it's your last. You're like, how do you hold those 2 cliches together? Like, I need multiple bumper stickers for my car. I think that's kind of what the rabbis are getting at here, right? Everything is given against the pledge. Like, you can always sort of borrow, you know, maybe time for your own spiritual growth, or time for your learning, or time for your relationship to covenantal, I don't know, covenantal what? Just to covenant, covenantal living. And there's a safety net, right? Like, everyone is contained and seen and held. And like, the store is open. Come get what you need. The storekeeper allows credit. You don't have to pay for it in this moment. And at the same time, like, it's not free. It's credit. Like, there's going to be an accounting. It's part of this balance. My mother calls like long leash, big net parenting, except that it's God, right? Like, there's a lot of leeway, and also I'll catch you, but you're not off the hook. Having flashbacks to being 16 and getting in trouble with the car now. I'm sure other people are as well. But this idea, this balance, I think in some ways the image of the creditor can be, you know, like the Holy One as the judge and the storekeeper and the creditor, and maybe the fisherman holding the net all at once. Can feel a little spooky or unsettling, but I think that there is something also meaningful here in that the Mishnah is saying there's leeway and there's limits, right? Like you could be a little holy bowling ball rolling all over this alley and there are guardrails, and yet like you still don't want to like jump into the gutter out of sacred relationship. Or eventually you're going to run out of space. I'm mixing my metaphors here, but that there's both freedom and containment. Again, it's like these two magnets. The rabbis are not, I think, coming to conclusions here as much as they're offering these alternate ways of trying to name over and over these essential tensions. They're just like, here is another extended metaphor for this tension. If that one doesn't resonate, here's another one. And here's another one. They're like, maybe you need the big contrast of I'm a little stinky drop and I'm going to be worm food, but also I'm going to get to talk to the king of kings. Or maybe we are not only created in the image of God, but we get to know about it. And, we not only are given Torah, but it's a blessing and we get to know about it. And Torah as a sacred vessel, maybe that's the articulation of this tension that resonates most with you. Or maybe the all-encompassing, net and company store model is what works for you. But it's like there is something, I think, there's even, a really compassionate pedagogy actually by the fact that this chapter and Pirkei Avot more widely, or even all of rabbinic literature, is so multivocal. It's not one voice and one person saying, this is the way that we do it. Instead, it's like, literally, right, we're going to encounter this at the end of Pirkei Avot, right, in a couple of weeks, right? Turn it and turn it, Ben Bagbag says, for everything is in it. That, one of these might click, but really they're not prescriptive so much as I think we can read them as descriptive. Of the rabbis are just trying to describe the tensions of living. And so it's like, go through and find what resonates and helps you name and helps you make meaning out of these tensions. And there's going to be some that like really turn you off because they're an articulation of the tension that either doesn't map onto what you've experienced or it just feels icky. And like, thank God, turn it and turn it again. Go a couple pages further, find another Mishnah. Yeah, Sonia.
I didn't really particularly like this at the beginning with the storekeeper and the credit and the ledger is open, but as I'm listening to you and also trying to read this and digest it, I'm noticing, first of all, the very last statements, which are just like the statements from those very simple three statements that we read earlier, seeing that the judgment is a righteous judgment and everything is prepared for the banquet. I mean, that's a fascinating ending. And it seems to me that the banquet could be about death, that the judgment is a righteous judgment is, refers or reminds me of that everything is judged with goodness or with blessings, that we were just reading. So there is something very, very reassuring about this. And as you say, also containing, there is some freedom. But it says, the collectors go around regularly every day, exact dues from man, either with his consent or without his consent. It's a very rich description of life in a sense, very, very rich and reassuring. Again, it reminds me of just a kind of a story that I guess that's what you're saying too, a story that the rabbis, are telling others about how life is, and it's complicated, but there's give and take, and there's some paying of attention to what we do, to our actions, whether or not we care or know about it, but in the end we're judged righteously, I think. And I love everything's prepared for the banquet. I mean, there's not a word about the banquet earlier. It's not, you don't get the sense that people are preparing for a banquet. So I just find it fascinating. Thanks for letting me talk. Sorry.
No, thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah, I just want to highlight too that those two last lines in the Hebrew. I think they're even more pointed in what they are meant to signal to us or what else they sound like. right? We have like so many words in English. We have like preponderance. And like Pirkei Avot just used the word rove, which just means a lot. But that these concepts are so resonant that they say, "Bahadin din emet," that like the judgment is a true judgment. It is. I think there's supposed to be a remez, a hint of the idea of, Baruch Dayan Emet, blessed is the true judge, which we say the first time we hear of someone's death. And then V'akol metukan l'seudah, like metukan, like tikkun, like not just prepared but repaired. That it's like ready, it's healed, it's set up. For a seudah is not just a banquet, but it's like a celebratory meal, like a seudat mitzvah that we do, at a b'nai mitzvah or for Purim or for a wedding. That there's some sort of like commanded celebration happening here, that involves both the strictness of judgment, but that there's this implied celebration, that I think is really stunning. And at the same time, like I think where I land after looking at all of these, it also to me resonates with these words from Kohelet, from Ecclesiastes, right? Which is, a person cannot know their time, as fish are enmeshed in a fatal net, and as birds are trapped in a snare, so too are people caught at a time of calamity when it comes upon them without warning. And I think ultimately what our sages are trying to do is to say we can't get rid of the fatal net or the snare, right? Like again, the people who redacted this text like saw their teachers martyred. They're very aware you can live a whole beautiful life of Torah. They even write a midrash, right, about Moses witnessing the death of Rabbi Akiva and looking at God and being like, this is the reward for being a Talmid Chacham? This is the reward for being Rabbi Akiva? Is this kind of ending? And God's like, that's not the point. Like, pay attention. He also got to be Rabbi Akiva. That like we can't, the net exists, the tohu vavohu is there, but what our tradition is offering us, right, with the sacred vessel, right, that we get to be aware of and in relationship with of Torah, is giving ourselves a framework for at least making meaning. To say that it's not only about the snare or the net or the worst moment, but rather it's about being able to metukan l'seudah, to like make for yourself a table and a banquet and a framework of meaning and beauty and connection. So I think we'll end there and take a few minutes back of time, and I'll kick it back to Dave. But I really appreciate you all spending a portion of your evening looking at this chapter with me.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. And Margo,
Thank you.
for such a rich teaching
Thank you.
tonight. I think a lot of the folks who are here tonight have been regulars each week. So I want to invite you to join us again next week when we'll be learning with Rabbi Sarah Krinsky. And it should be another really enriching week in this journey through the Omer on our way to Shavuot, studying the wisdom of this tradition. So again, Rabbi Margo Hughes Robinson, thank you so much for tonight, and wishing everyone a Erev Tov.
Thank you so much.
Margo. So
Thank
good
you, Dave.
Thank you.
Good to see you all. Have a good
Thank
night.
you. Excellent. Thank you.